Hi, this is Carson with Troy, and I have with me TC Edge. TC is a fantasy science fiction author, and some of his works include the Variant series, Children of the Promise, the Watcher series. You're very prolific. The Enhanced. The latest one that I found is the seventh book in the Bladeboard saga. Is that correct?
Yes, that's my last release in February, I think, this year. So
Awesome. TC, go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself and about your books. And I didn't mention all your series. There's a few more.
there's a couple more in there. Yeah. No, I'm TC Edge, science fiction and fantasy author, as you said. Been writing for I think a little over 10 years now. My career's kind of been in two halves so far. First half was the dystopian speculative fiction, a bit of urban fantasy with those first series you mentioned. A lot of them crossed over. Like with the Enhanced, there were several series that kind of interconnected characters. And the second half of my career since COVID time has been epic fantasy, and that's been the Bladeborn. So it's kind of funny. I that first half I wrote dozens of books, mostly very short books, or not very short, but shorter books. And now I've completely transitioned the other way, and I write maybe one book a year, and they're a lot longer, a lot bigger in scope.
So what had you or what were some of the thought processes to make that shift into epic fantasy, make it a little bit longer stories?
Just passion for that particular genre, I think. I really enjoyed writing the dystopian and the speculative fiction, but I mean, as a reader and any TV shows, movies, and things like that, I love fantasy. That's really where I'm most comfortable writing as well. So I think what stopped me doing it at first was just the intimidation of that sort of scale, and that's the size of book I wanted to write, and the number of characters, and having to create entire kingdoms and um, magic systems and things like that. So, but during COVID, I had a couple of box sets from my previous series that were doing quite nicely, and I thought, okay, now this is a good time. I'm at home a lot. I'm at home a lot anyway, writing, but the world's at home, and I'm gonna pivot into something else and just try something else. And then I just thought that was a good time to try the epic fantasy, and it's worked out pretty well. I think Bladeborn's my most successful and popular work so far. So yeah, it's all gone nicely.
I know in some of the writing community, it's you pick a genre and you kind of stick with that for a little bit. Did you find your fans kind of not necessarily have like any complaints or anything, but like was it kind of jarring for your fans when they were like, okay, I love this dystopian, the sci-fi, and now he's writing fantasy. Like, did you have a hard time convincing fans to try and transition to give you a shot?
I think I did actually. I was hoping that I'd get a lot of people coming over from the sci-fi stuff, but they're very different books. People often lump it together, sci-fi and fantasy, but there are the connective strands between them. But yeah, Blade One is very different to what I've written before, and I think I got some coming over, but I really had to start again almost. I think with that transition. So I had to build up from book one, book two, and the first few books really didn't do very well. Certainly not as well as I hoped. I had to persist, and when I was writing those older books, they were much shorter. If it's not doing particularly well, it's okay. I'm going to have another book out fairly soon, and you can kind of keep it going. But when you're writing the long books, you have these dark periods where they're not selling particularly well. There's not many reviews and ratings coming in, and it's going to take 6 months, 9 months, even a year to get the next book done. So I persisted, and I'm glad I did because I've definitely built, I think, a better fan base now than I ever had in science fiction, and it feels more secure as a genre for me to write in. Even the annual release. I mean, the common wisdom is regular releases. When you're indie publishing, one release a year is quite hard to sustain a good audience and a good income, but it seems to be working quite nicely.
Awesome. What was some of that motivation that kept you going? There's lots of people that would have given up.
Um, I think it's just like, having been writing for years, I had to keep going. What else am I going to do? I mean, I had one series in the past. The Phantom Chronicles. That's the only series where I wrote the first couple of books and they didn't do well, and I just wrapped it up in 4 books. I had an idea to keep it going, and because I tend to write longer series than just 4 books. Um, I struggle to tell a story in like a trilogy. I just need to kind of let it expand as it wants. But with that one, it just wasn't selling, so I just had to try to wrap it up. But with Bladeborn, I kind of felt I'm not just going to try to wrap this up. I've set up way too much, and I certainly can't abandon it. I think some authors may have just gone, okay, I'm going to write something else. Maybe I'll come back to it later on and see if that other thing does better. I don't know. I felt confident that it's just a matter of time and persistence. And because I had a big backlist, it wasn't like I had nothing else to sustain me income wise. I had good sales coming through from the backlist, particularly from the box sets. They always did well. So I had that to fall back on. So I could take my time. And yeah, it wasn't really until book 4 came out that it started to do better and everything started to be more self-sustaining, and I was running ads as well after book 3. I think I started running ads. That's often again another piece of wisdom in the world of indie writing is wait for that third book and then see how it goes, because people want to know that there's a story coming through rather than just one book and then you might give up. So I started running ads after book 3. When book 4 came out, that really pushed book 1 up, started to do well, and they all did well. And then I kind of went from there with more confidence.
Awesome. So what was like the genesis of the Bladeborn saga? You said your COVID era. What was the seed for the story?
It's a good question. I was reading Sanderson, The Way of Kings, and I really like his shard blades and those sort of powerful magical swords. And I had this idea of, what if that's a little bit more widespread? There's more people who can wield these type of swords. And if there was one particular kingdom, let's say, or race of people who could tap into this power, how would that be counted in another rival kingdom? And so they were the Bladeborn, and then I came up with the Fireborn, who are the rivals, and they can bond the dragons, and then that led into this whole duels between the Bladeborn knights with their special armor and their special blades versus the dragon riders, and the sort of history and tradition of those duels that develops over time. And then from that, you build out the wider conflict around that particular conflict.
Awesome. And now you are kind of known for characters that gain extraordinary abilities. What fascinates you most about the idea of humans becoming more than human?
Hmm. I think it's just fun. It's a fun playground to to work in. You know, especially when you have someone who gains this power, how do you counter that with another power? If someone just gets all powerful, that's boring. You need these rivalries, you need these conflicts. But you've got to keep it as grounded as possible, So you do have to, it has to be balanced. So in the Bladeborn, there's the Seaborn as well, and they have particular abilities, and you have the Lightborn, and they're in other lands, and they can bond Starcats and Sunwolves and these sort of magical beasts, and it all balances into these greater conflicts where you have the knights wielding their special blades versus the dragons versus the people riding the giant wolves and the giant bears. And I'm quite a visual writer, so I kind of grew up more watching TV shows and movies than I did reading, actually. So um, I like to visualize these big cinematic scenes and then bring them to life. And when you have all these different powers, that can make for exciting battles and duels and things like that.
Well, when you start writing, when you begin a project, do you start with these epic set pieces, or do you start with like the emotional arcs of the characters?
I mean, I like to figure it out as I go largely. So I will often, I mean, I'll set a character sheet, and I'll come up with a backstory for the main characters, and who are they? where do they come from? Where are they going? And I'll have some beats later in the book or the next book that I want to reach, but I don't know how I'm going to get there. And yeah, the conflicts around that come around them will often just be they'll come organically through the story as you're actually telling it, which is, it's kind of fun as you're writing because you're exploring as you go.
So you mentioned that when you're reading Sanderson, The Way of Kings, the Shardblades kind of influenced you and thought about what if they were widespread. Um, do you start kind of with that in mind when you begin a story, or and then come up with an end scene, or do you have like, okay, how can this end to where it's like super fulfilling, it's epic? How do you begin your story? Do you start with kind of the end, or with the seed that, and you kind of grow from there?
I mean, it's funny. I actually have an end scene for the whole end. I'm writing the last book now, and I've had it in mind for quite a while. Just this, how everything's going to come together. So there is an element of that, certainly, where you do have that the end, the kind of epic battle and the particular duels and that you're going to have with the major characters you've set up. Um, yeah, so I'll have those throughout the series, throughout the books that I kind of want to lead towards, but generally, I don't know. It's a hard question to answer because it's such an organic process and it's quite instinctive a lot of the time. And each day you just sit down and you're kind of exploring it as you go.
Well, you mentioned balance, and as you're going along, writing the first draft and whatnot, when do you know to like kind of backtrack and be like, okay, like if I do this, like you said, it's going to be an all-powerful character. How can I balance this out and offset it so that it's not too powerful too quickly, and so that we can arrive where I want to arrive at the right time?
I mean, that's a good point. If you can write yourself into a corner with a certain character if they're too powerful. Um, and yeah, there have been instances where you timing is a good point because you have so many characters all moving around the world, and you want to bring them together at a certain point. But someone might be traveling this way, someone's traveling this way, by a different method, and you often have to kind of bring them off to the side, sidetrack them on a different quest or something else, just to keep them busy. Um, but again, yeah, it all comes through just as you're doing it and as you're writing, and yeah, it's a very natural evolution as you do it. So I don't, yeah, it's a hard question to answer, as I said. See.
No, I get it. Sometimes you just have a feel for things and you can't really explain it. No, I get it for sure. You've written in multiple genres, and your worlds are immersive, but yeah, each one is distinct. Do you approach world building differently depending on the genre, or do you have a signature method that you always use?
I mean, I guess because when you're writing dystopian, you are set in a world, that is pre-established, your own world, this world. You can jump forward a bit in time and you can kind of see how might things have developed. So the enhanced is about sort of genetic engineering and there's sort of the enhanced versus the unenhanced to it, sort of those who haven't been genetically engineered and the different class dividing lines that come through there. With fantasy, it's yeah, it is grounded in certain ways because you have medieval fantasy are kind of right in that feudal system and in a lot of the kingdoms and things like that. Um, but you can probably you have a bit more scope to make things up in certain regards with the magic systems. But I mean, there's a lot of crossover, to be fair, with the two.
Awesome. What does a typical day look like for you, and how do you maintain balance? Like, what are some of your writing habits?
I mean, I kind of treat it as a regular job, So I'll come down, coffee. I'll always read what I've written the day before. So I try to do very clean first drafts. So I won't write the book and just let it flow out and then come back to the beginning and go and edit, doing it the second draft. I'll always read what I've done the day before, make absolutely sure it lines up with everything else that's come before it in the book. A lot of kind of fact checking sometimes to make sure eye color is the right eye color and all that sort of stuff. Um, and then I'll go from there. I'll continue. But there are days where you end up editing out everything you've written the day before, and it can be a bit of a one step forward, two steps back, or at least you're kind of treading water. But yeah, I tend to keep regular hours if I can, because I want to have an evening. That said, I have that sort of creative mind where it comes alive a little bit more in the evening. Some people are morning people and they can probably get straight into it. I take a while to warm up into the day, and then it gets to 6, 7 o'clock at night, and I'm like, okay, now I'm entering that sort of flow state, and it's like I just want to relax now. You end up, that's where all the good stuff comes out, and then but then you see it in the morning, and you're like, maybe it wasn't so good. You end up editing all out. So yeah, but I do try to keep regular hours as much as I can so that I can, you know, uh, live a regular life and have the balance in life as well. And it's funny because you get like a bank holiday where everyone's off work. I really struggle to, even if I don't, okay, I want to work today. I really struggle to work when I know that the world is off work or the country is off work. So I really have set myself up to be, I'm a working person, and I don't just write when the inspiration takes hold. I put my ass in the chair and I get to work.
Awesome. Do you find that consistency helps you get in a flow state easier?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. But it does take time, and I think more as I get deeper into the saga, there's just so much in my head, and especially I'm writing the last book now, trying to pull everything together that I've set up over 7 books and 8 books is a lot. So it takes longer to get into that flow state. So I've just been away on holiday for the last week. I've just come back, and I know that this week is not going to be brilliantly productive. I just know it's going to take towards the end of the week. Maybe I'll be getting into a better flow state, but and I that inner critic comes alive. When even if you have a good weekend off and you have fun, and you come back to work on Monday, I read what was writing on Friday, which I thought was great at the time, and I'm like, no, this is not good. So which can be dangerous because then you can be hypercritical and you end up kind of going back through it, and you can edit a lot out or just start, tinkering too much when it's really just where your mind is at the time that's affecting how you're looking at your own work. Because I can look at other, books I might be reading, going, this isn't, it's not as good as I thought it was on another day. Um, so you've got to be careful with that. But yeah, it does take a little bit of time for me to get into that state. But by next week, I'll be up and running for sure.
Well, how do you silence that inner critic?
Just, you got to just beat him down by working. That's honestly, it's time in the chair. Often you just write something, just start a new chapter, go, okay, I'm done with that particular character. I'm gonna start with someone else and just let it come out. And if it's no good, it doesn't matter. But the more you write, it will just come through. It's like going through the gears of a car. You'll eventually get up to full speed, and and it just takes, like I say, it just takes just time in the chair.
Awesome. That's actually great advice. To keep people who are struggling with that, just get in the chair, work hard, and get the words on page and be able to work through that. Power often comes with a cost in your stories. How do you decide what sacrifices or consequences your heroes or villains must face?
I mean, yeah, there are consequences for sure. Deaths, you know, disfigurements, things like that. It is often they come out again naturally as you're telling the story. If it feels right, you can have those wow moments to yourself. Okay, I've had quite a few of those. But yeah, you can't. I don't like the idea of having huge conflicts, huge wars, and yet there's no real personal cost to the characters that you've written. Everyone stays alive, everyone's happy ending. One person dies, maybe no. There's got to be it's got to be balanced out by, if there's a lot of war, there's going to be a lot of people dying. But that really helps by writing a lot of characters. You have a lot to pick from. Okay, your time is up. If if you have three or four POV characters, it's harder to to kill them off. That said, I guess just reviewing it in my head, my point of view characters, most of them stay alive, I suppose, but it's sort of the secondary characters who can be just as important to the story. They just don't necessarily have their own chapters that might kick the bucket. Um, and yeah, there has to be that cost, and you've got to write those scenes well. I have had people in the past say, shake their fist at me. I didn't want that person to die, but I understand why you did it. And that's what you want to hear. It's like they want to be saddened by it, miss that character, they like that character, but it's you've got to have this feeling of jeopardy in a world where there is jeopardy. You
Hmm.
know, everyone's inspired by Song of Ice and Fire these days, certainly inspired me a lot. Everyone's like, you just don't know who's going to die. And that creates that fear when you're reading or watching the TV show. I try to keep to do that as well, not to the same extent, but yeah, there are, and obviously writing the final, half of the final book, there will be some deaths. I think people are aware of that, and they're just sort of wondering who it's going to be, and you can seed in little bits through the story as well, little hints of, who might die and who might not, but you do want to surprise people as well.
So astute readers could like maybe pick that out.
They could potentially, or I might be reading too much into that. I don't obviously say it like obviously there's a prophecy you're going to die, and then he dies.
Right.
Just certain you get a feel for maybe a character how their inner dialogue might be leading them towards, and you go, oh God, I got a bad, how you get that watching a TV show or you're reading a book, I got a bad feeling for this character. They're not going to make it. I want to give that feeling to the readers without being too obvious about it. But then you can flip the other way and go, oh no, they don't die. So you thought they were, and now they don't. So yeah, I do like to keep people guessing as much as possible as to you know what's going to happen. Twists and turns, and it helps massively. Like I was saying earlier, with my own writing style, um, kind of pantsing, as they call it, rather than plotting. Although I do a mix. Like I said, I might have some story beats I want to hit, but I'm discovering my way there a lot of the time, and then you can have very surprising, e- even deaths that you didn't necessarily expect, and you're like, actually, that really works, and it surprised me, and I'm gonna leave it as is, rather than going, oh, they're alive, actually. So yeah, that's one of the great joys of writing, in that fashion. You get these moments of surprise for yourself, and you hope that if you've surprised yourself, you should be surprising your readers as well.
That's fantastic. Um, you know, Bladeborn Saga Enhanced, and some of your other series are, multiple books. What challenges have you faced in keeping continuity and connections consistent across such a broad canvas?
I take a lot of notes, and I don't do the whiteboard, with the post-it notes and things like that, but I have just my own software where I'll just keep adding to the little character journeys and things like that. But that takes a lot of time, honestly, referencing back to things to make sure you are being consistent and you're not going off on, you know, random tangents and leaving big plot holes. I hate plot holes. I'm sure I've left some, but I don't get too many people saying, that's a big one there. So I think I'm quite tight on that. But yeah, it's kind of I have my notes, but I try to keep it all in the head as much as possible. And I mean, I think this is probably why I don't do multiple projects at once. You have other authors writing different, you know, books and sagas and series simultaneously, often in different genres. I think I'd struggle to do that. I need to focus on the one thing at a time. So yeah, and I promise my fans that Bladeborn will be completed before I do anything else, and then I can move to the next thing. That being said, I have, I'm always taking notes for other ideas and other stories, and I'm developing stories in the background, just not really, um, starting to write them yet.
Well, when you're done with your next book? Are you going to take some time off, or do you already have the next book, a series that you want to pursue?
I have, yeah, like I say, I'm taking a lot of notes for the next kind of Bladeborn, you know, sort of level of saga, which will be set. It's, people always ask, what's next? Is it going to be a prequel? Because obviously you have a big saga. There's a lot of history points that are always being referenced and things like that. Flashback scenes, and people want to see the older characters when they were younger warriors in this old war that happened 20 years ago, or do they want to see the time of the demigods and things like that? I I won't do that because I fear that you're limiting your audience a little bit. I know, people smartly, they write book one of a prequel as a new entry point, into the whole saga. But often you get a lot of your readers will come and read it, but not everyone, and it can be kind of diminishing returns. So I don't want to do a prequel or a sequel. I'm going to do kind of a side quel, as I call it. So set in a different world map, but I'm kind of building the connective tissue in the last few books, particularly to what might come next, and a couple of characters who are kind of these divine type characters who can kind of maybe pop up in the next, saga for people to go, oh, I know that one from. But it will be to any new reader who's not aware of me, which obviously that's most people. They can come in and go, oh, what's this? They don't have to go, I've read Bladeborn, and they can, you know, that now you have to have read Bladeborn to read this. Um, so yeah, that's probably my next main project, but I do have a couple of others that it's kind of just bubbling around in my head, which is there's one that's very different actually, a different genre completely, which that's why it is just an idea at this point, but um, that would be more of a. It's partly because my wife, she doesn't care for fantasy, so she's like, I don't want to read your books. And I'm like, well, I want you to read something. Um, she loves she loves like crime novels and kind of detective stuff and set in London. So there's this author she loves uh, called Jane Casey, and I had read one of her books on holiday. I was like, I really like this, and it would be very refreshing because it would be a smaller book and not easier to write because you're actually setting it in the real world, but it would be a very different challenge. So that's something I might do um, on the side. But then, like I say, when I'm stuck into a project, I do struggle to get out of that headspace and into something completely different. Um, so yeah, it will probably just be the next Bladeborn side crawl that comes next.
That's awesome. But a new entry point, so people don't have to necessarily read the Bloodborne saga before they jump into that. If they happen to see it on a shelf or something and say that looks interesting, they don't have to read the previous eight.
Absolutely not. No, it won't. Like I say, there'll be some connective tissue, but it's otherwise going to be kind of brand new. That's the idea. But yeah, I'm still tinkering with the ideas. Maybe there'll be crossover characters later down the line. Now that's what I did with the enhanced. I wrote the enhanced, and then I wrote the Children of the Prime, which I kind of maybe I was like 4 books into that when I decided to bring them together, and that kind of led to that kind of the enhanced universe, and then that led to several sequels to the enhanced books with those characters, and then another. Then I did the Variant series, which was also set in the same world, and they crossed over, and it all became, a bit, all muddled up like that. I kind of at the time Marvel was doing their whole, cinematic universe and having the characters cross over, and I was like, oh, that's a nice idea. So I started to write in that sort of fashion. Um, but yeah, I don't know if I'm going to do that yet. So that it is still quite early days. I have a very fun concept, I think, for the next big fantasy saga that I'm excited to get to actually because it's fresh and you can take all this weight out of your head of the current thing and go, oh, blank canvas again. I can kind of just, and it's a lot easier starting from the beginning because there's no end in sight and you can just let things expand and then you have to bring it together eventually. But at the beginning, it's a bit freeing.
Awesome. Well, I'm sure your readers are excited for that when it comes out. I'm sure they're excited for the final book in the Bloodborne saga too. If you could step into one of your worlds for a single day, uh, Blade-borne enhanced variant, whatever, where would you go and what would you do?
I mean, it depends who I am in this world. You know, if I'm a particular enhanced type of enhanced, the hybrid, that could be quite fun. If I'm one of my characters in Blade One, if I'm like Elian or something, and he carries the Windblade, you can fly around, or you'll be a dragon rider. Yeah, that would be quite fun. Or you just you go down to a local tavern and you know have some drinks and you hear some stories, see what people are talking about.
That's awesome. Um, what has surprised you most about the journey of building your career outside of traditional publishing?
What surprised me most?
Yeah, or has it been anything?
I mean, it's surprised. Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure about surprised. It's just it's been a long journey. It's been a hard struggle at times. Can be quite solitary, and that's why it's kind of good to get out there and actually, interact if you can, which I'm trying to do more of. Um, but there's great opportunities out there. It's wonderful. You don't have to go through the gatekeepers. Anyone can technically publish a book. They're not necessarily going to be great. I'm sure there's many great books out there that don't see the light of day. And that's one of the things a lot of people don't realize that you don't have to. Some people they have something that just hits it off because of a certain, a want at the time, a great cover, a great book, something that just works for them. They don't have to market it too hard. But certainly, I've spent a lot of time and money marketing and advertising my books. So you have to be more than just a writer. You're a publisher. You have to be a authorpreneur, I guess. But then, if the more you do it, the better you become. Um, the more you feel you're in control because you've had these challenges and you feel like, oh, if that doesn't work quite so well, I know I can be persistent. And if you know you're at the core, you're good at what you do at the storytelling, and you can be persistent and diligent and just keep working hard, then yeah, unless Amazon suddenly changes the whole rules, which they've done in the past, and you know, the whole, well, they did it they went from the borrowing and you kind of, the 10% you had to read, it's kind of pre-Kindle Unlimited where a reader would read up to 10% of the book and that would trigger the borrow and you'd get maybe $1.50 or $2. And that obviously inspired people to write very short books. And now they have the pages read system, which is a lot fairer. And it's been going for a long time now. So hopefully that'll stay like that. And it kind of works for long books as well, which is good for me. But they might change the rules. So you don't have complete control there. So it is wise to try to branch out and, make connections with traditional publishing if you can, which I mean, I have my connection with Podium. They obviously publish my audiobooks, so there's that. And I was speaking with an agent recently about potentially this is actually the crime book. If I write that, we're talking about working together on that and finding a traditional publisher maybe for that. Just to so you're not all the eggs in one basket, because that's the big fear that something does change in the ecosystem and it's outside of your control. But yeah, the more you do it, the longer you're in the industry, you realize that you do have a lot of control. And yeah, like I say, any setbacks you've been through, any hurdles, you can jump them, you keep going. And it's very gratifying. It's hard work and it's very gratifying and it's great to, bring the joy of the written word to people.
So at the beginning of your career, what was some of the thought processes versus, traditional versus indie, and why did you choose the indie route?
I wouldn't say I chose it. I think I was forced into it. I mean, I kind of half-heartedly tried to, find an agent. I think everyone has the same story. They sent their money, they wrote their manuscript, they thought this is brilliant, and you send it off to all the agents, and crickets, you hear nothing back, and that's just stage one, right? Getting an agent. they get thousands of manuscripts a year. They might take on a few clients, and then they've got to find the publisher, and it's, hopefully going to be a good deal. But then you cede all control to them, and they edit it, and they put their own cover up, and they'll have their release schedule. Um, and you're kind of left waiting, and you have no idea how it's going to do. So traditional publishing is that, but indie publishing, it is nice to have that control. So, and I'm not particularly patient, so I wasn't going to wait, you know, hoping and keep submitting to try to get an agent and things like that. So I just thought, that's not working. I'll do it myself. And yeah, it took some time again, to get the ball rolling, but I thought I had a good story. And The Watchers of Eden was my first book, and The Watchers, that trilogy then became 6 books. But yeah, I kind of started to take off. I mean, take off to a small level at that time, when I had the first 3 books out, and I put The Watchers of Eden, the first book, on. I made it permanently free, and then I drove lots of eyeballs and lots of people towards that. And then I saw that book 2 was selling reasonably well, and then book 3, I was like, okay, this is quite a good system. And then yeah, it just kind of went from there. And I think that's why at the beginning I wrote a lot of books in a short space of time, because I was just trying to build something. And that felt like the kind of easiest, the quickest way to try to build a career in this crazy world of indie publishing. And yeah, after several years, when I transitioned to the fantasy, I thought, okay, I'm kind of more secure now. I never feel quite completely secure because, like I say, there's that little fear at the back of your head that something's going to change, or everyone's going to realize you're shit, and they don't. Sorry, pardon my French. They don't like your books, and it's all going to crumble. But yeah, um, but yeah. So talking to the agent, it's kind of fun because you get to the point in your career where you bypass. I just emailed this agency, and we just had a Zoom chat like this, and it was just like between peers, and you know, there's no trying to sort of submit and being ignored and all that. It's just now chatting about, oh, let's work together. That was very refreshing. It was kind of a nice little pat on the back and go, oh, actually, that's you've worked towards the front of the queue. Through a lot of hard work and yeah, testing and graft, but a good fun journey as well.
Right. And you have the results now versus at the beginning of your career where you can be like, hey, look, like these are already selling. Like
Yeah.
maybe we should work together and do these things together instead of being at the beginning of your career where nobody knows you, nobody knows what you've done. And so yeah, that hard work definitely pays off. You mentioned, being an entrepreneur. You have fantastic covers, your audiobook partnership with Podium. Um, finding an editor at the beginning of your career. How did you go about finding those stuff to get your book out? Your cover artist, your editor, if you have an editor. You said you try to publish clean first drafts, but how did you work at the beginning of your career to find that stuff?
Trying to think where I found my first. I mean, my designers now are excellent. I use um, a an art studio in the Philippines, and they do my artwork for Bladeborn. Before I was, it's more costly now, obviously, because you can kind of afford, and you want to, if you're doing 1 book a year, especially, you can invest in a better cover and everything like that. Get some good artwork done. At the start, I was trying to go, much cheaper covers. Um, and I can't remember maybe it was 99 Designs, I think is the website. Do you know that website? I think it's 99 Designs. I just put up a job, and then I got the applicants coming through, and it was pretty cool because they do a kind of small mock-up of what their idea is going to be, and they obviously develop it later. But then I found a guy, and I worked with him for years, and he did a lot of my, he basically did all of my covers in Dystopian, um, all those books. Editing wise, I've never had an editor. I have a proofreader but I still get people going, I'm spotting a lot of typos. So, that's something to work on, but they're such long books. It's amazing how many little mistakes slip through the net, honestly. I think I go over my work so many times. like I said, I go back each day and I read it and I write it, and then I, come back the next day and and then I will do after I finish it, I'll go all the way through it again, mini editing and just try to find anything. I'll use Grammarly to try to pick out any errors. And then I'll send it to my proofreader and she'll come back, yeah, there's 200 typos in the book. And then still you'll get, people going, here's a typo, here's a typo. I don't know how it all slips through the net, but it does. I think I need to do probably a couple of proofreaders in the next series just to clean it up. But editing, yeah, I've never had like a developmental editor or anyone to actually give me pointers or help me develop the story. Yeah, I'm very instinctive in that way. I've never read a book on craft or anything, and it's weird because I always assume every author was a huge reader in their youth, and that's all they wanted to be. They've read 1,000 books or 2,000 books, and that's their dream. I read books as a kid, but I wasn't this huge reader. I was more watching movies and films and TV shows, and that's kind of like I said earlier. That's why people do say I write in a kind of cinematic way, and people can really picture themselves in the scenes. I think that comes through from being a film fan. Um, so yeah, it's I guess I haven't really had people saying you need an editor, so I think it's working. But I'm sure if I went back to the early books, I think obviously you 10 years in, you get better as you go, you would hope.
Right.
If those early books and read through, I'd be like, okay, this could use a couple of passes by an editor to try to, maybe even the ones now could trim some fat. And I'm sure if I gave it to a professional editor, they'd trim a lot out and maybe trim down some storylines. I don't know. Um, but it's just, again, it's my impatience. If I give it to an editor, the whole book, I don't know how long they're going to take to go through it, or you know, I like to, and I have to see the way that control a little bit. So
Well,
yeah,
it sounds like you have a system that's working, and fans are loving it. So, if it's not broke, don't fix it, right?
pretty much that's kind of how I hope it's working. Yeah, but yeah, I mean, like I say, if I did write a detective novel set in London and worked with an agent and found a publisher and an editor, then I'd do it all officially and see how that goes. And it would be just to you know have that other outlet, um, and a bit of support as well because yeah, it can be a little bit like I say. I always have that in the back of the head. Something's going to change, and it's nice to have support from you know Podium. And I have actually just sold um, to AST in Russia as well. So they're going to publish in Russian globally. The first two books should be coming out this month, actually, they tell me, but they were saying that. They've been saying that all year. So I don't know. Again, that's traditional publishing. Yeah, it'll come out in May, it'll come out in wherever. And now it's, months go by. I'm like, when's it coming out? Yeah, September apparently. So that's fun, I don't expect anything from, yeah, foreign deals are kind of nice, but you don't really expect much from them. But yeah, it is nice to just branch out and you know, try to get more support from other publishers if you can.
Awesome. No, congratulations on that. That's pretty cool. Um, so what are some of the things that you do to outside of writing that helps kind of reset things and makes you really enjoy life? I see a guitar in the background. I don't know if you mentioned you had a wife. I don't know if that's yours or your wife's, but what do you like to
That
do for
is
fun?
a gift from my wife. It's probably gathering dust now. I'd do that and I'd come back filthy. No, I'm a rank beginner, but yeah, I try to strum a few chords, and there's a piano as well, and she's a pianist, but not professionally. She's just good at the piano. Try to play some piano. Yeah, we like to just live a full life in London. Go for dinner, and we like to go to the theatre. And she's actually Russian by heritage through her mother, actually Latvian, so Eastern European, and so out there, it's opera and ballet is very big, so we do that as well. She's sort of made me like it, sort of. I mean, it's okay. I prefer the theatre's great. But yeah, so we do that, and I just like to keep fit, and could do a lot of walking. London's such a beautiful city, especially in spring and summer. And yeah, that's where you kind of recharge. We travel a lot, and well, as much as we can, with work, commitments and everything. So yeah, that's kind of how you have that balanced life. You see friends and family and all that. Yeah.
Awesome. You mentioned earlier that Sanderson kind of influenced your work stepping into that fantasy world. Um, what are some of your other influences? I mean, you said you're a big film, cinema, TV. What are some of the shows or books that have influenced you?
I mean, Game of Thrones, I would say, is the main influence. I watched the show before I read the books, and I've read the books all through, two or three times. I always have it kind of just if I'm feeling a little bit lacking something, I'll just read the chapter. And I'm currently on the third book again, just working through. And yeah, I think my kind of writing style is influenced by Martin. So but that said, I kind of started a little bit smaller in scope with the Blade One, and now it's kind of got a little bit out of hand. It's got a bit crazy, so it's kind of gone more Suns and some level of, you know, this sort of apocalyptic wars and everything, like the whole, world ending war. And yeah, I'm just reading Joe Abercrombie now. I'm loving that. So, that's something, that kind of grim dark stuff. And back in the day, with the old dystopian, it was very much Hunger Games. I read those. I really like those. Lord of the Rings, of course. Lord of the Rings. I've read the books only once, but I watch the movies once a year if I can. Extended editions. Not with the wife. I have to watch these on my own. Just- she'll go away home for a week or something, and I'll just devour those. They're my favorite movies of all time. They're easily. I absolutely adore them. But I don't really write in that kind of high fantasy, wizards and dwarfs and elves way. Yeah, so in terms of writing, it is a bit more Martin and Sanderson kind of mix there. Games as well. I will play an occasional video game. The Witcher 3 was phenomenal. Um, and yeah, you kind of you pick up bits and bobs, through all these things, without obviously copying anyone. I think you just get these inspirations for like, oh, there's a little plot line there that you can adapt into something, and there's an interesting character quirk, and that could work with that, and you kind of everything's just a big puzzle. You just pick out pieces and you fit it all together in your own, kind of unique way, hopefully. Um, it's funny that I'll get like accused sometimes. I'll have like an advert on Facebook and I'll have comments and people will say, oh, this is just a rip-off of, Wheel of Time or something. He's just, copying Robert Jordan. Never read Wheel of Time. So it's just like there's just commonalities with how people might think, and they might, you know, come up with a similar idea without having even read it. So I just think there's only so many ideas out there, and you're just kind of it's how you put the cocktail together,
Right.
and it's execution more than kind of complete originality. Um, you can be original in certain respects, but there's still going to be a lot of common ground between all the authors. Like I said, I'm reading Abercrombie now, and I'm like, okay, this is similar to certain things in Martin and Song of Ice and Fire, and just the way the world is. But there's enough that's completely different, and the way where he's delivering it is just phenomenal. And that's what you hope to do as an author. You hope to deliver something familiar, but also, with enough spice in it to go, that's cool.
No, that's great advice. Um, TC, do you have any other final advice to give the audience?
To prospective writers,
Yeah.
persistence, honestly. I think a lot of people they'll try and it won't be working, and they'll go, it's not for me. I think you really have to be persistent, and trust in yourself. Try to get feedback if you're starting out. There's loads of places on the internet, and then hopefully people have their own communities. Try to get feedback from people. But you need to trust in yourself as well, and yeah, just keep working. Put the ass in the chair and just keep on working. It's easy for me to say because I mean, I'm sure people when they're trying to write on the side, they've got a job, they've got kids, and they can only have an hour here, an hour there. It's going to take a lot longer than if you're writing full time. And if like when I started, I was able to kind of put a lot of time into it. So I was kind of lucky in that regard. So that's easy to say. So I can never know anyone's particular circumstances, but just believe in yourself and keep working. And if it takes 6 months, a year, just try to put something together. You know, just if you really think there's a story in you to tell, you've got to put that work in.
That's great advice. Go ahead and tell everybody how they can get your books, where they can reach you. I don't know if you go to conventions, but if you're going anywhere or to meet the fans, where they can see you.
I need to start doing that. I haven't done that yet, but I need to get out there and start meeting people. Yeah. Yeah, my books are all on Amazon. I'm kind of exclusive through Kindle Unlimited, so they're all on there, and yeah, through Audible, through Podium. Um, yeah, I mean, I guess Watchers of Eden is permanently free, so that's available wide, I guess, on other platforms. Yeah, and I'll try to get out there and get to some conventions and maybe I don't know what are good ones. What would you recommend?
Oh man, I don't know over Europe area, England area
Yeah, I'm
for
happy to know if there's anything over in the States. So I think
well,
most of my family are up there. I sell a lot more in the States than I do in England. So
well, big one's Dragon Con, which just barely is getting over.
oh,
That's a
next
that's a
year.
that's a fantastic one. Great for authors, great for to meet fans. That's kind of more geared towards um, books and authors, where like a lot of the Comic Cons aren't, although you'll find lots of fans through that, but it's a more variety like a Comic Con. Like the particular one that I go to is called Fan X, and they have different ones all over Salt Lake, Tampa, and whatnot. And I always say it's four conventions in one because you got people that go just for to see their favorite artists and whatnot. And there's people that go for their books, and there's people there you got movie stars and whatnot. So like, and there's stuff that there's merchandise that people go for just for that. So like it's kind of four conventions in one, and you kind of have to pick. But stuff like Dragon Con or conventions geared towards uh, you know that fandom of authorship and fantasy books and stuff like those ones are great. So if you get a chance to go to that one, like I've never been, I want to. So
Well, maybe I'll meet you there. Maybe next year.
I'm hoping to get there next year. So we'll see. But Toby, thank you so much for getting on with me. Your website. Go ahead and tell people your website so they can find you there.
Yep, TC Edge Books. It needs some professional help, honestly. This is something I've set myself up and yeah, set up myself, and it hasn't. I need to add to it and make it a bit more punchy because it's not the best website, but that's another thing to work on. But yeah, TC Edge Books and Facebook, just TC Edge. I'm trying to build up my Instagram has been completely neglected. I need to work on building my following there, but I've got Facebook's where I've kind of typically delivered any news or released, cover art and things like that. So yeah, just search TC Edge and I'll be over there. And I try to return any, like talk to fans. If anyone messages me, I'll always respond and I try to respond to every comment. I'd like to have that community at least over there.
Perfect. Thank you so much for getting on with me today. I really enjoyed it and learned a lot.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Troy Podcast. Please subscribe, like, and share with your friends.